Welcome to Fantastic Vision. Please subscribe us before you watch today's video. A semiconductor empire worth tens of billions was legally seized overnight. The Dutch government unearthed the 72-year-old Supply Act, issuing a ban on Nexperia, a Chinese-controlled company, followed by reports of a potential takeover by a domestic enterprise. While European automakers faced production halts due to chip supply disruptions, the Chinese team calmly announced they would not acknowledge the deal. When the Netherlands seized control of this overseas asset that originally belonged to a Chinese company, China demonstrated through multiple rounds of countermeasures that the Netherlands' leverage was limited. On October 28, the Nexperia saga took another turn. The Netherlands seemed unwilling to compromise on key issues, instead planning to have a domestic company take over Nexperia's Dutch operations. China's Wingtech technology responded with concise and straightforward language, completely shattering the Netherlands' unrealistic illusions on the matter. Rewinding to September 2025, the U.S. Department of Commerce suddenly introduced the penetration rule, extending export controls to subsidiaries of entity-list companies with more than 50% ownership. This seemingly technical adjustment, like a precision-guided missile, aimed directly at Nexperia, a subsidiary of Wingtech Technology. Just weeks later, the Dutch government invoked the 1952 Supply Act, which had never been invoked before, freezing all operational decision-making power of the Chinese company over this enterprise on the grounds of national security. This tacit coordination, happening almost simultaneously, makes it hard to believe it was a coincidence. Documents released by the Dutch court on October 14 show that the US and the Netherlands had already engaged in intensive communication regarding the penetration rule, with the US even setting conditions: replace the Chinese CEO and adjust the governance structure, or face sanctions. This is hardly an independent sovereign decision, it is clearly a transatlantic joint action. Ironically, to justify its actions, the Dutch government began smearing the Chinese team. Four self-proclaimed insiders jumped to the forefront, accusing China of planning to lay off 40% of its workforce, close its Munich R&D center, and relocate classified equipment from its Manchester factory, attempting to whitewash the Netherlands' actions. However, these sensational accusations were met with a complete lack of substantial evidence. There were no internal documents, no meeting minutes, just a few people making claims. The Dutch government's plan was equally shrewd. Having taken control of the headquarters, they would find a domestic company to take over, turning this semiconductor giant with annual revenue of 14.7 billion yuan into a made-in-the-Netherlands enterprise. Wingtech Technology, naturally, wouldn't sit idly by. A spokesperson pointed out incisively that 80% of Nexperia's final products are packaged and tested in China, and its back-end production capacity almost entirely relies on the Chinese supply chain. This statement directly shattered the Netherlands' illusion that after this blatant takeover, they could turn Nexperia into a domestic company. This means that the Netherlands only seized an office. The core operations remain in the hands of Chinese companies. With the chip supply chain disrupted, Chinese companies can completely restore the free shipment of chip products by building their own industrial chain. As for potential issues related to technology patents and product sales, Nexperia's equity is held by Wingtech Technology. Furthermore, the domestic company has already separated its decision-making from the Dutch headquarters, so there's no need to worry about headquarters decisions affecting operations in China. According to a report by the German supply chain analysis company Prewave, 86% of leading European companies source chips from Nexperia's Chinese base, covering 7 key industries including automotive, aerospace, and defense. Automotive giants like Volvo and Volkswagen have warned that if the supply chain impasse isn't resolved, their European factories may be forced to shut down. In this situation, which Dutch company would dare to take over this hot potato? Without Chinese production capacity, and without customer trust, taking over would mean facing a precipitous business collapse. During the high-level Sino-Dutch trade and economic phone call on October 21, China bluntly urged the Netherlands to uphold the spirit of contracts and market principles, and correct its erroneous practices as soon as possible. The subtext behind this diplomatic rhetoric is crystal clear: you've gone too far this time, stop now, or face the consequences. This incident actually exposes a fatal misconception in the China policy of certain Western countries. They believe that as long as companies operate on their territory, they can arbitrarily use administrative means to restructure market rules and rewrite economic laws with political will. But reality has repeatedly proven that in the era of globalization, the industrial chain can no longer be controlled by any single country. 80% of Nexperia's production capacity is in China. This wasn't designed by anyone, it's the result of market selection, cost advantages, and technological accumulation. The Dutch government's use of a 72-year-old law against a 21st-century high-tech company is itself a dark joke. The Supply Act was enacted in 1952, when transistors had just been invented and integrated circuits was still a concept from science fiction. Using such a law to handle today's semiconductor industry disputes not only goes against the trend of the times, but also shatters the fairness, openness, and freedom that the Western world has touted for many years. When rules can be rewritten at will, it's not just a single company that suffers, but the credibility of the entire international investment environment. As things stand, the Dutch government should have realized the enormity of its actions. The EU's urgent search for a quick and pragmatic solution, and the pressure from multiple member states on the Netherlands, all indicate that the severity of the problem has exceeded initial expectations. Yet, the Dutch government is still hoping to find a domestic company to take over. This one-sided, double-dealing approach exposes their ignorance of the logic of modern supply chain operations. The semiconductor industry requires technological accumulation, customer trust, and supply chain collaboration. These cannot be solved by a mere administrative order. Wingtekker's prediction that any Dutch company that takes over is destined to fail is gradually becoming a reality. When customers lose trust, when production capacity cannot be guaranteed, and when the supply chain breaks down, the so-called takeover is nothing but an empty shell. What the Netherlands painstakingly seized may really just be an office building.